The heat clung to the city like a fever. Pavement shimmered, the air smelled of gasoline and dust, and even the shadows seemed too tired to move. Somewhere between the cracked sidewalks and the roar of distant traffic, Hoa Karen pedaled her bike like it was the only thing keeping her heart in rhythm. Her delivery bag thumped softly against her back, worn straps digging into her shoulders. To most eyes, she was just another courier weaving through the city's veins, hair pulled high in a neat bun, jacket faded from too many summers, sneakers patched at the toe. But if you looked closely, you might notice the way she scanned the street without turning her head, the way her hands held the handlebars, steady as a sniper's grip, the way she never seemed surprised. That day, her route cut through the industrial quarter, past loading docks and graffiti-tagged warehouses. The sun was at its cruelest when it happened. The sudden growl of engines closed in behind her. She didn't have to glance back to know who it was. The sound was distinct, the deep, predatory rumble of the Iron Serpents. And then, Blade Riker was in front of her. Leader of the crew, dressed in a black leather jacket scuffed at the shoulders, boots heavy enough to dent steel, Blade had a grin that never reached his eyes. He blocked her path without a word, the sun flashing off the chrome of his bike. His crew fanned out behind him, three men with loud mouths and stained jeans, their laughter already echoing like they knew the ending of a joke she hadn't heard. Without warning, Blade stepped forward and shoved. Karen's bike lurched sideways. Her front wheel twisted, delivery bag tipping. In a single ugly motion, she was down, the hard kiss of asphalt scraping her palm as the bag burst open. Plastic containers slid across the pavement, a sandwich split open, fries scattered like straw, soup bleeding into the gutter. The smell of broth mixed with the hot tang of tar. The Iron Serpents roared with laughter. "Look at her, crawling around like a stray," one of them jeered, spitting onto the ground beside her. Karen said nothing. She moved on her knees, gathering the food with measured hands, stacking containers, wiping her fingers against her jeans. Her hair stuck damp to her temple, but her face stayed unreadable. Only once did she look up, just a flicker, and her eyes met Blade's for a heartbeat. Cold. Exact. Enough to make him pause before the grin returned. When he shifted as if to shove her again, she moved. It wasn't dramatic, no wide step, no obvious dodge. Just a subtle shift of weight, a precise sidestep that left his hand grasping empty air. The kind of movement no untrained civilian would think to make, much less pull off. But the crowd on the opposite sidewalk didn't catch it. They only saw a girl on her knees, scooping up soggy fries under a punishing sun. Workers on lunch break had drifted closer. Two teenagers filmed on their phones, snickering. "Yo, she just got owned," one said, the other zooming in. The video's title was already forming in their minds. Delivery Girl Wrecked by Biker Boss. Across the street, an older man in a faded work jacket and grease-stained hands shook his head. "That girl's got something," he muttered. No one listened. Karen zipped her bag, stood, and lifted her bike. Blade stepped closer, boots thudding on hot concrete. "You deaf, girl? This is our road." Karen met his eyes again. "And I have work." Her voice was low, almost conversational, but the words sliced through the laughter. For a second, Blade's smirk faltered. Then he waved her off, chuckling for his crew's benefit. Karen pedaled away, the heat pressing against her back, the weight of the day already settling on her shoulders. She didn't look back, but she could feel their eyes on her, like the first shadow before a storm. The next afternoon, Hoa Karen's route pulled her toward the rougher edge of the district, a stretch of cracked pavement and shuttered shop fronts that smelled of stale beer and burnt oil. She knew the place. Everyone who rode the city for long enough did. At its heart sat the Rust Fang, a squat biker bar with a flickering neon sign, its blue glow sickly even in daylight. Karen was coasting past when she saw him. Blade Riker, sprawled in a plastic chair out front, boots crossed, a cigarette hanging lazy from his mouth. Two of his crew leaned against their bikes, passing a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag. The third sat on the steps, flicking a lighter open and shut, the click-click-click keeping rhythm with their laughter. "Hey, delivery girl," Blade called, his voice carrying over the hum of traffic. "Bring it here first." He tapped the ground in front of him with two fingers, like summoning a dog. Karen slowed, eyes dropping briefly to the order slip clipped to her bag. "Your name's not on the order," she said. Flat, steady. The grin drained from Blade's face. He stood slowly, rolling his shoulders, and stepped into her path, so his shadow fell over her handlebars. The air between them smelled of smoke, leather, and cheap whiskey. "You don't talk to me like that," he said, voice low enough that it felt meant for her alone. From the doorway, a woman in a tight denim skirt and too much eyeliner leaned on the frame, her voice loud and sharp. "What's with the outfit, sweetheart? You rate a dumpster for that jacket?" She laughed, tossing her hair so the sunlight caught her hoop earrings. The other bikers joined in, their chuckles bouncing off the bar's walls like thrown bottles. Karen's fingers curled around the grips of her handlebars, knuckles pale under the faded gloves. Her face stayed blank. The gap between two parked motorcycles was narrow, their chrome parts catching shards of light. She measured it in a glance. Then, without a word, she slipped one foot to the ground, angled her front wheel, and rolled through. Her shoulder brushed the saddle of one bike, just enough to make it rock on its kickstand. The woman's laugh cut off mid-breath. Did she just... But Karen was already back in the street, legs pumping the pedals, head low against the afternoon glare. Behind her, Blade's jaw tightened. The chair he'd been sitting in went flying with a kick, its cheap plastic skidding across the pavement. The lighters clicking stopped. For a long beat, no one said anything. By the time Karen reached her next stop, the echo of their voices was gone, but the heat under her skin wasn't. She locked her bike outside a narrow convenience store, its windows plastered with faded posters. She bent to secure the lock, her jacket slipping just enough to reveal the edge of a black tactical glove under her sleeve. Not the kind you bought at a sporting goods store, snug, reinforced at the knuckles, built for impact. A young biker, maybe 19, buzz cut sharp against his pale skin, lingered by the curb with a soda in hand. His gaze caught on the glove, his brow knitting. "That's Spec Ops gear," he murmured, half to himself. Blade, standing just a few feet away, shot him a glare. "You seeing ghosts now?" he said. But his own eyes lingered a beat too long on Karen's wrist. Karen pulled her sleeve down, clicked the lock shut, and walked inside without looking at them. The fluorescent lights hummed above her as she gathered the order from the cashier, who slipped her a candy bar with a quiet, "On the house." Karen didn't smile. She just tucked it into her bag and stepped back into the sun. Outside, the young biker was still watching her. Blade lit another cigarette, but his draw was too sharp, the ember burning faster than it should. The wind carried the faintest whiff of tension, the kind that comes before something breaks. By the third day, the city's heat had shifted. It wasn't just the weather, it was the air between them, the kind that made every shadow feel like it was watching. Hoa Karen was outside a grocery store, crouched to lock her bike to a steel pole. The street smelled faintly of ripe fruit from a nearby vendor, but the undertone was diesel and cigarette smoke. It came from behind her. "You're still here," Blade's voice said, close enough that she felt the shape of the words against her ear. She rose slowly, the lock clicking shut. Blade stood just inches away, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned forward. "Stay out of this area," he whispered. The softness in his tone was worse than a shout, cold and deliberate. "Or else." Before she could take a step back, he bumped her shoulder with his chest. Hard. It forced her to shift her weight, one foot sliding on the warm pavement. Across the sidewalk, a man in a flannel shirt holding a grocery bag stopped mid-step. A woman with a cart paused, her eyes darting between them. Neither said a word. Karen straightened, her gaze finding Blade's. She held it for one long, measured second. Then she turned without a sound, pushed the store door open, and disappeared inside. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as she moved down the aisles. She picked up bread, a carton of milk, a packet of tea bags. At the register, the middle-aged cashier scanned each item, her eyes lingering on Karen's face. "You're the one who stood up to those bikers," the cashier said, voice lowered. Karen didn't answer. "My brother," the woman continued, sliding the bread into a paper bag. "He got pushed around like that once. Never fought back. Wish he'd had your spine." Karen gave a small nod, not agreement, not dismissal, and took the bag. As she turned to leave, the cashier slipped a candy bar across the counter. "Free. Just keep going." Karen tucked it into her pocket and stepped back into the sun. Blade was gone, but not for long. That evening, Karen's route took her through a busier part of the city, where the glow of streetlights bled into the last traces of daylight. She stopped at a red light, her bike steady beneath her. Engines rumbled again. Too close. Blade's bike slid into view beside her, its chrome catching the neon reflection from a nearby sign. He didn't look at her right away, just revved the engine, loud enough to rattle the air. Then, without warning, his hands shot out, gripping the strap of her backpack. The yank was brutal. Her balance faltered, the bike swerving. She was off the seat before she could catch herself, stumbling into the road. A truck's horn split the air as tires screeched. Karen rolled hard to the side, palms scraping across the asphalt. Laughter erupted behind her, sharp, jagged. Blades. But she was already on her feet. Her eyes locked on him, steady as stone. She strode forward, hands loose at her sides, every step unhurried but inevitable. Blade's smirk wavered as she reached for his jacket collar. One twist of her hips, one clean pull, his weight worked against him. He hit the pavement with a dull, bone-heavy thud. His bike tipped, the metal screaming as it met concrete. The laughter died. A passing car slowed, the driver leaning out to sea. The rest of the Iron Serpents stood frozen, disbelief written across their faces. Karen didn't speak. She turned, picked up her bike, and rode off without looking back. Behind her, Blade lay staring up at the sky, his pride crumpled in the gutter beside his bike. And for the first time since this began, the city's eyes were no longer on him. They were on her. The sound of the fall still echoed in people's minds long after Karen disappeared from the intersection. By the time she reached her next stop, the city was already talking. At a corner store, a group of older men nursed cheap coffee on overturned crates. One of them, a retired mechanic with a limp, tapped his mug against the table. "That girl's got more guts than half this town," he said, voice gravelly with approval. The others nodded, eyes tracking the street as if expecting her to pass again. And she did. Not long after, her shadow stretched across the cracked sidewalk, the weight of the day carried in her pedaling. She didn't look at them, didn't slow down, but their gaze followed her all the same. Words spread faster than the traffic. By nightfall, the story had already twisted into something bigger, the delivery girl who dropped Blade Riker. Some swore she'd humiliated him in front of half the district. Others claimed she'd done it without breaking a sweat. A few, those with sharper eyes, spoke of the way she moved. One of them was there an older biker with gray hair curling out from beneath a faded bandana. He'd been leaning against a lamppost when she'd thrown Blade, and he'd seen it the fraction of a second when her sleeve slipped back, revealing a faint tattoo on the inside of her wrist. Not decorative, not random, an emblem. He'd served long enough to know it, SWCC, Special Warfare Combatant Craft, close quarters combat training, the kind you didn't get unless you'd worn a uniform and passed the kind of tests that broke most men. When he muttered it aloud, the reaction was instant. The younger biker stopped talking. Blade's own breath seemed to hitch. "She used to be in that unit," the older man said, voice low, almost swallowed by the street noise. Karen, already on her bike, gave no sign she'd heard. She slung her bag over her shoulder and pedaled into the night, her outline shrinking into the glow of the streetlights. The Serpent stood in silence. For once, no one called after her. The next morning, the air felt different. Karen's first delivery took her past a row of small shops with peeling paint and faded awnings. A woman in her 60s, hair braided down her back, was sweeping her stoop when Karen pulled up. "You're the one they're all talking about," the woman said, pointing her broom like a weapon. "Took down that loudmouth biker, didn't you?" Karen set her kickstand, adjusted the strap of her bag, and shrugged. The woman laughed, deep and throaty. "Keep that fire, girl. Men like that need reminding the world doesn't spin for them." Karen nodded, handed over the order, and rode off. By noon, the whispers had become a low hum wherever she went. At a gas station, the clerk rang her up faster than usual, eyes flicking to her wrist but saying nothing. At a stoplight, a patrol car idled beside her, the officer inside giving her a deliberate nod before the light changed. Even kids noticed. A boy on a skateboard slowed as she passed, muttering to his friend, "That's the girl who dropped Blade." Karen didn't acknowledge any of it. Her focus was forward, her breathing even. But she felt it, the shift in the air, the pause in conversations when she entered a room, the weight of unasked questions pressing in from every direction. And somewhere in the city, Blade Riker was nursing more than a bruised ego. His crew had thinned. The young one with the buzz cut was gone. The older one with the bandana had gone quiet. And Blade was watching, waiting. The warehouse sat at the edge of town, where the streets thinned into gravel, and the air carried the weight of diesel fumes. Trucks came and went in a steady rhythm, their brakes hissing like tired animals. Hoa Karen coasted in through the gate, her tires crunching over grit. Inside, the place smelled of oil and old wood. The warehouse manager, a man with a clipboard and a nervous habit of clicking his pen, waved her over. "Sign here," he said, avoiding her eyes. She set the bag on the counter and pulled a pen from the side. Her handwriting was neat, each letter deliberate, when the air behind her seemed to shift. Someone had walked in. She didn't turn right away, but she felt it, the kind of presence that bent a room's edges inward. A tall man in a plain jacket crossed the floor with measured steps. No patches, no logos, nothing flashy, but the way he moved was clean, economical, dangerous. His eyes scanned the space once before settling on her. "Mr. Moore," the manager stammered, pen frozen mid-click. Karen's pen slowed. She didn't look up. Not yet. The man came to stand beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his hand rested lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't heavy, but it was enough to silence the faint clatter of tools and machinery from the back. Outside, the low growl of a bike engine drifted in. Blade Riker. He was leaning against his motorcycle, helmet dangling from 2 fingers. Only 2 of his crew remained, the stocky one with the scar across his cheek, and a thin hanger-on who never met anyone's eyes. When they saw the man in the plain jacket step out with Karen, the change was instant. Blade's smirk collapsed. His cigarette froze halfway to his lips. The scarred one muttered something sharp under his breath, boots scraping against the gravel as he shifted back. The thin one's hand tightened on the bike's handlebar until his knuckles showed white. No one said the man's name. No one had to. Karen handed the signed slip back to the manager, adjusted the strap of her bag, and walked toward her bike. The man followed, just behind her shoulder. At the curb, he brushed his fingers lightly across her hand, a small touch, but one blade didn't miss. She mounted her bike, pedaled away without a backward glance. The man stood there until she was gone, then turned his head once toward Blade. No words, just a look. Blade's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't say a thing. That evening, Karen stopped at the Rust Fang. Not to confront anyone, just a delivery. The place was half empty, the air thick with stale beer and smoke. As she set the bag on the bar, a pair of men at the pool table glanced up. "That's her," one said under his breath. "The one who put Blade down." The bartender, a gaunt man with tattoos creeping up his neck, slid her change back without counting it. "Keep it," he muttered. Outside, the last traces of daylight bled into the streetlights. A stray dog trotted past, its nails clicking on the pavement. Karen mounted her bike and pushed off, her shadow stretching long ahead of her. Somewhere behind, the sound of a lighter flicking open and shut started again. But it didn't follow her. Not tonight. The city's gossip shifted from whispers to murmurs you could hear from half a block away. The tale of Hoa Karen and Blade Riker had taken root, spreading into places she had never set foot in: diners, gas stations, mechanic shops, even the line at the laundromat. But not all the talk was harmless. For those who had stood with Blade, the world had begun to turn in small, cutting ways. The woman from the Rust Fang who had mocked Karen's jacket, her social media had exploded overnight, not with praise, but with screenshots of her jeers, posted by someone who'd been there. Sponsors dropped her. Friends unfollowed. The clout she'd built evaporated like steam on asphalt. The slick-talking man in the tailored jacket from the downtown office building, the one who told Karen to stick to her side of town, was suddenly out of a contract. No explanation, just a voicemail from his boss that left him staring at his desk, knuckles white on the receiver. Even the stocky biker with the scar wasn't untouched. His boss at the auto shop called him in, voice clipped. "Don't bring trouble to my door," he'd said, handing him his final paycheck. The man had no reply. Karen knew none of this firsthand. She kept to her roots, pedaling through streets that seemed to part just slightly for her now. At a coffee shop, the barista with a man bun slid her drink across the counter with an extra shot unasked for. "On the house," he said quietly. At the gas station, the attendant greeted her with a nod and rang up her bottle of water faster than usual. Even the patrol car at the intersection, same officer as before, slowed as she crossed. The nod he gave her now accompanied by the faintest smile. It was subtle, but the shift was there. People looked at her differently. One afternoon, her route took her back to the small diner where the waitress with the sharp tongue had first spoken to her. The lunch rush had thinned. Only a few truckers remained, hunched over their plates. "Girl, you're all anyone's talking about," the waitress said, leaning over the counter. She set a paper bag in front of Karen, heavier than usual. "Pie's on me. Keep making them think twice." Karen gave a small nod, tucking the bag into her delivery pack. Outside, the air was warm and restless. She unlocked her bike and swung a leg over the frame, but didn't push off right away. Across the street, she saw Blade's bike parked in the shade of a narrow alley. Blade himself wasn't visible, but the flicker of a lighter's flame glowed once, then vanished. She didn't turn her head toward it, didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she pedaled into the slow bleed of sunset, the city unfolding before her in streaks of orange and gold. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, she sat at her small kitchen table, unwrapping the pie. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and cooling metal from her bike chain. From the drawer beside her, she pulled out a photo creased, its edges softened from years of handling. A younger Hoa Karen stood in the frame, smiling beside a man in a military uniform. Their shoulders touched, their postures relaxed, but their eyes, those eyes were the same as hers now. She studied the picture for a long moment before sliding it back into the drawer. Some battles didn't need to be fought in the open, and some victories didn't need to be announced. The days after the warehouse encounter felt different, as if a line had been drawn in the street and everyone knew which side they stood on. Hoa Karen kept riding her routes, but the city seemed to ride with her now, eyes following, conversations dimming when she passed, a quiet respect trailing in her wake. Blade Riker, though, was a shadow she could still feel at her back. 3 nights later, the feeling took shape. It was just after 9 when Karen rolled down a narrow street lined with auto repair shops. Most were dark, but one, a low building with rusted shutters, still had its bay door open. Light spilled across the asphalt, along with the metallic clink of tools. She was halfway past when she heard it. The sound of a bike engine throttling once, sharp and quick. Blade stepped from the shadows at the far end of the lot. His crew was smaller now, just the scarred one and the thin hanger-on, but they fanned out enough to block the street. Karen braked, her tires humming against the pavement. She didn't dismount. "You've been busy," Blade said, voice low, almost conversational. "Making friends. Making stories." She didn't reply. The scarred one shifted, the movement jangling the chain hanging from his belt. The thin one glanced at Blade, waiting for a signal. Blade took a step forward. "Thing is, stories, they can end any way I want." Before he could take another step, another engine rolled into earshot, deeper, smoother, controlled. From behind Karen, a black sedan eased to the curb. The man in the plain jacket stepped out, everything stilled. He didn't look at Blade. He just crossed the distance to Karen, stopping beside her front wheel. "You done here?" he asked, eyes still scanning the street. Karen gave a small nod. Blade's jaw twitched. The scarred one muttered something she didn't catch, but the thin one took half a step back. The plain-jacketed man turned his head slightly toward them, and whatever they'd been about to say died in their throats. No threats, no raised voices, just a silence heavy enough to press into the skin. Karen pushed off, the man falling into step beside her, until she reached the next corner. Then he stopped, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her ride away. By morning, the version of events had already grown teeth. At a cafe, a pair of truckers argued over whether the man in the plain jacket was ex-military, law enforcement, or something worse. At the gas station, the attendant told a customer that Blade had gone pale as chalk and hadn't been seen since. Karen ignored the chatter. Her deliveries took her past familiar spots. The Rust Fang, now quieter. The grocery store where the cashier slipped her another candy bar without a word. The corner where the older mechanic sat sipping coffee, tipping his mug in her direction. Late in the afternoon, she stopped at the community center. A teenage volunteer with a ponytail spotted her, eyes widening. "It's you," the girl said. "I saw what you did to him. I wish I could do that." Karen handed over the order. "You're stronger than you think," she said, voice even but firm. The girl's face lit with something more lasting than excitement resolve. As Karen left, the sky was slipping into shades of deep amber. She pedaled steadily, the cool evening air carrying faint sounds of the city music from an open window, a dog barking somewhere distant. And for the first time since this started, she realized Blade's shadow wasn't at her back. Not tonight. By the time the week turned over, the streets had a memory. Every block Karen rode felt like it knew her, like it had witnessed something and was holding it close. The quiet nods from strangers were no longer tentative, they carried certainty now, as if the city itself had chosen its side. Blade Riker had vanished from his usual haunts. No chair out front at the Rust Fang, no late-night rides tearing through the industrial district. The Iron Serpents, once loud enough to own the air, were a ghost of themselves, a couple of lone bikes seen here and there, always moving, never stopping. But trouble didn't end just because it went quiet. It was near dusk when Karen cut through a narrow lane between two shuttered warehouses. The air was thick with the scent of rain on hot concrete. She'd nearly reached the far end when she caught the reflection chrome and black leather in a puddle ahead. Blade stepped out from the side alley. Alone. His jacket was zipped to the collar, his boots freshly polished. The swagger was gone, but there was something else in its place, a stillness that made the space between them feel smaller than it was. "I should have ended this the first day," he said, voice low, hoarse. Karen set one foot on the ground, the other still on the pedal. Her hands stayed on the handlebars, but her weight shifted just slightly ready. Blade's eyes flicked to her wrist, to the place where the faint tattoo lay under fabric. "Sss," he said, almost spitting the letters. "I looked it up. That's not delivery work." Silence stretched, the kind that could tip either way. "You humiliated me," he went on. "But worse, you made me invisible." His mouth twisted. "And I can't ride with that." Karen didn't move. Then the sound came low, deliberate, an engine rolling in from the far end of the lane. The plain-jacketed man's sedan appeared, its headlights washing across the cracked walls. Blade's jaw clenched. He looked past Karen toward the car, then back at her. Whatever had been simmering in him seemed to drain out in that moment, replaced by something smaller. "You win," he said, stepping back. The words didn't sound like surrender, more like admission. Karen pushed off, her bike rolling past him without a brush of contact. The sedan slowed as she passed, the man inside meeting her eyes briefly. No words, just that look again, as if confirming something unspoken. By the time she reached the open street, the first drops of rain had started to fall, dotting her jacket in dark patches. She rode through it, the cool wash easing the heat in her skin. In the days that followed, the fallout moved quiet but deep. The last of Blade's crew drifted away. The Rustfang's neon sign went dark. Blade himself was seen once, riding out of the district with no one at his back. Karen didn't mark the change with celebration. She kept to her roots, the grocery store, the diner, the gas station, but now, people met her with more than just nods. The waitress at the diner slid her an extra slice of pie without asking. The barista added a second candy bar to her coffee order. The older mechanic tipped his mug to her like a salute. One evening, as the sun dropped low, she stopped at a park bench. The air smelled of wet grass, the laughter of children carrying on the breeze. She unwrapped a sandwich, setting her bike against a tree. From her pocket, she pulled the worn photograph herself. Younger, standing beside the man in uniform. She traced the edge of the image with her thumb before tucking it back. Strength wasn't always in the strike. Sometimes it was in the ride after, in the way you kept going when the road wanted to throw you off. And as the streetlights blinked on, Hoa Karen kept pedaling head high, eyes clear into a city that now saw her for exactly who she was.